Okay, we are live once again with the Deity chart Mythstreams, where we are going through the entire chart that we've put together of the Indo-European equivalencies across multiple branches, hitting pretty much all of the main gods. Um, so today, after following up on the Apham Napat stream, it seemed logical to go next to the god Varuna and his parallels. Varuna being this sovereign god, he is crucially and perhaps foremost, he is one of the gods who embodies the sovereign, who is the god of sovereignty. Um, and then also with that, he is god specifically of waters and also of uh, night in an interesting way. So there's this sort of complex overlap of the concepts of night, the night sky, specifically the waters, as well. So often that is specifically like the celestial waters, the waters of the sky or of the night sky. So these kind of concepts kind of run together in a complex way. Being the god of the waters, he then can develop into or become more emphasized in relation to things like the sea or also rivers. But nonetheless, there is this powerful connection to waters that we'll go into. He is one of the two gods in the in this duad of sovereign gods, king gods that are known as Mitra and Varuna. So Georges Dumézil wrote his famous book Mitra Varuna about this compound dual deity found in the Rig Veda that combines the names of Mitra and Varuna as if they are combining their powers together. They're being worshipped as, a pair or two sides of almost like one ultimate sovereign who is Mitra and Varuna. And he goes into the polarity between these two sovereign types so that over the course of his book, he explains how Varuna has this lordship, this sovereign power, sovereign role, more aligned with, as I said, the concept of night and everything that kind of relates to night, the early half of the cosmic year, which is aligned with night and darkness. And then Mitra is more aligned with the daylit sky, the second or latter half of the cosmic year. And concepts then kind of follow and go along with that split, that duality between these sovereign gods, so that they have different characters and different roles, even though they also have things where they overlap because they're both the sovereign. They both have the sovereign powers, often relating to order, keeping order, certain things related to war in both cases. They have this core overlap and point where they combine, but they also have these polarities so that they represent kind of the two halves of the ideal sovereignty. One of those things, going along with, I'm not sure what AI or all or al means in that comment, so I'm not sure. But in any case, we have with Varuna, because he is the first half of the year, he is aligned with the first half of the year according to Dumézil, and this he draws that from the material in the Vedas and the Brahmanas, mainly the references to Varuna and Mitra. They are split up this way. Varuna is then aligned with a concept that he refers to with the Latin word celeritas. So celeritas, and Josephus, I'm sure, could clarify and correct this, but refers to haste or speed, energy. So in the first half of the cosmic year, essentially, it's like a youthful outburst of creative energy that the sovereign embodies in this early point. So this connects to the establishment of nations, the these sort of war campaigns of terrible energy that have to, forge a nation, forge the sovereignty itself. And so this outburst of violence, and for some of these reasons, Dumézil calls Varuna the terrible sovereign. He has this terribleness to him in this haste celeritas energy, but also connected to how that then becomes his sort of severeness in terms of laying down the law, laying down order, punishing sin in a way. There's repeated references to his nooses and his spies that entrap and capture the sinners and things like that. And so that is this terrible sovereign. He's this embodiment, this god who is the sovereignty in this first half. And this gives way, and we'll go into this in a future stream, to the Mitra type in the latter half of the cosmic year, so to speak. And Mitra then embodies more gravitas contrasted with celeritas. Gravitas, of course, is sort of, I think Dumézil relates it to morality, even moralism, but also there is a sort of august, peaceable, pacific, tranquil quality that he tries to get through about the Mitra type in the latter half. So once the sovereignty has been established by the terrible energy of the Varuna type, in a sense, the rule then can be sort of established more with more stability, more gravitas in the latter half, where it's more about it becomes more about legalistic maintenance of rules and things like that. So there's a way in which the Mitra type becomes aligned with more legalistic concepts. And also even the concept of sort of the aged sovereign can align with it's complex because Mitra can also be youthful, but there's a concept behind there of the cosmic year aging into the autumn of the year. So this autumnal quality becomes attached also to the Mitra type. But it's complex, like I said. Mitra also has a youthful early morning solar aspect. So we'll get into that hopefully in the future. But that sort of defines Varuna in contrast to Mitra. Sometimes we see Varuna being pacified by Mitra. Mitra has to pacify the sort of vengeful wrath or what have you of Varuna, who is this more terrible sovereign in a sense. And I'll just read a quick passage from Arthur Anthony MacDonald, the scholar, showing some of the main references, relations of Varuna specifically to the waters, because I think it's important to understand that he is a waters god as well. The waters are aligned with the celestial waters of the night sky. He is the god of the night sky again. And so the waters, they're all overlapping there in a sense. And this becomes important in his later mythos in India, but also in the European Varuna parallels. We'll see the god Poseidon, for example, as a probable parallel here. So this is from A.A. MacDonald's Vedic Mythology. We have, quote, "Even in the Rig Veda, Varuna is often spoken of as a regulator of the waters. He caused the rivers to flow. They stream unceasingly according to his ordinance." In Rig Veda 2.28.4, "By his occult power, the rivers swiftly pouring into the ocean do not fill it with their water." 5.85.6. Varuna is already found connected with the sea in the Rig Veda, but very rarely, perhaps owing to its unimportance in that collection. Varuna going in the oceanic waters is contrasted with the Maruts in the sky, Agni on the earth, and Vata, that is the wind god, in air. 1.161.14. The statement that the 7 rivers flow into the jaws of Varuna as into a surging abyss, 8.58.12, may refer to the ocean. Varuna is said to descend into the sea, Sindhum, like Diaush, 7.87.6. It is rather the aerial waters that he is ordinarily connected with. Varuna ascends to heaven as a hidden ocean, 8.41.8. Beholding the truth and falsehood of men, he moves in the midst of the waters, which drop sweetness and are clear, 7.49.3. Varuna clothes himself in the waters, 9.90.2. He and Mitra are among the gods most frequently thought of and prayed to as bestowers of rain. And then also, he is connected with the waters as Soma with the mountains, Atharvaveda 3.3.3. As a divine father, he sheds rainwaters, Atharvaveda 4.15.12. His golden house is in the waters. He is the overlord of waters. He and Mitra are lords of rain. And in the Yajurveda, he is spoken of as the child, Shisu, of waters, making his abode within the most motherly waters, BS 10.7. The waters are wives of Varuna, Taittiriya Samhita 5.5.4, and Mitra and Varuna are the leaders of waters, Taittiriya Samhita 6.4.3. Unquote. And then he goes on to describe, of course, that Varuna has these ordinances. He's identified with Rita, the cosmic law. So he's kind of embodying and regulating the law so that, he is prayed to be released from sin and that sort of thing, because he is this God connected to these types of ordinances, as we've described. So with that, Josephus, would you like to touch on one of the comparisons that to Varuna that you had in mind?
Well, I mean, there's a lot of things to say, even starting from what you already read. For instance, the concept of celeritas actually reminded me of Keller, who is basically the first lictor. In ancient Rome, lictor was the servant tasked with carrying the fasces, so the symbol of kingship or other forms of authority, and could bind people who kind of got in the way of a king or a magistrate. And Keller is sometimes credited with killing Remus, even though Romulus would be the one to mandate the killing. It would be materially performed by Keller. So it's really interesting. I think Dumézil also touches on Romulus as a potential parallel for the Varuna type, although with great difficulty. Interpreting Romulus is always a headache for scholars. So I guess we can go straight.
Let me answer this quick question to give a citation for the celeritas and gravitas James Fields was asking. So in Georges Dumézil's Mitra Varuna, page 40 on the one that I have here online, and he says that, let's see, the Romans expressed this in an arresting formula. The bodyguards of Romulus, the first Luperci, are called the Celeres, from celer meaning swift, and the successor of Romulus, Numa, began his reign with 2 complementary acts. He dissolved the Celeres and organized the triple Flammonium in Plutarch Numa 7. This opposition between the mystique of celeritas and the morality of gravitas is fundamental, and it takes on its full meaning when one recalls that the dizzying intoxication of speed among the shamans of Siberia and our own Grand Prix circuits is just as much a stimulant and intoxicant, a means of achieving an illusory transcendence over human limitations, as is alcoholic intoxication, erotic passion, or the frenzy stirred by oratory. Okay, so that is what he's drawing on, this concept where, Romulus, like you said, has these Celeres, and then Numa, and he interprets Numa as the Mitra type. So Numa is succeeding Romulus as the Mitra type, who then, as he says, dissolves those Caleres because he is not the sovereign of Caleritas. He is stabilizing or whatever, what have you, in a he is lowering the tempo, you could say, of sovereignty in a Mitra type way in Dumasil's interpretation. So.
Yeah, precisely. Numa is also the king who establishes religious rituals. So obviously, we have both the legalistic and the religious side to this kind of figure. Obviously, in an ancient society, they would not be in contrast to one another. They would be kind of two faces of the same coin, right?
Right.
So I think we can go straight to the hymns of Poseidon, the Greek, most likely homologue of Varuna. Of course, since the Mitra and Varuna types are so closely related, there would be some overlap, right? So it's possible that Zeus, the Greek Mitra type, also inherited some mythology from the Varuna type, or shares some mythology with what other branches have as the Varuna type. So it's maybe wise to be careful of that. But even with all these considerations, it's clear that Poseidon is the main homologue of the Varuna type of the other branches. So here we have the Homeric hymn. Obviously, I start from the Homeric hymn, which is more ancient and was usually recited in public. So it kind of mirrored the consensus of the ancient Greeks of the Archaic Age around this deity. He is called Megantheon, so you can see the great god. This is interesting. Zeus is often called Megistos Theos, so he's the greatest god. Here we have a great god, maybe already not as great as his brother Zeus in this conception. He's the one who moves the earth and the fishless sea. Now, obviously, there are plenty of interpretations for Atrugetoyo. It's a very old epithet, and no one really knows how to translate it. At any rate, he's the one who moved the earth and the sea. Obviously, there's some mention of his cult places, which obviously are not relevant to Proto-Indo-European religion, which was practiced far away from Greece. So he's obviously associated also with horses. That's interesting. Maybe not strongly paralleled among the other branches, but maybe we can also find something along those lines. He's again the one who holds the earth, Gaieoke. He has this dark blue hair. Now, dark blue wavy hair is obviously pointing to the sea, right? So the waves of the sea are paralleled by the hair of this god. And well, obviously, he is invoked to help people who travel by sea, right? So, as the god of the sea, that would be kind of the main concern of these deity type. So, obviously, we have another perspective on the same deity, which is from the Orphic hymn, which is obviously a bit later and was recited usually not in public, but rather as part of rituals inside the temple, so not necessarily open to everyone. I have to say that it's overall a very similar interpretation, right? So we still have some of the same epithets. He's the one who holds the earth. He's the one with blue wavy hair. He's associated with horses once again. He also has like his trident, right? Triaina here is the name of the trident, obviously made out of bronze. Which other metal could they conceive for gods to use? Who lives in the foundation of the deep sea, guardian of the sea, the one who has a sea-like sound, so the sound of the sea waves, right? Deep sounding, shaker of the earth, one who flourishes in the waves with a gracious face, who rides four. I think it's supposed to be a four-wheeled chariot. I'm not sure if it's four-wheeled or four-horsed. This is actually said of the sun, so it's interesting that we also have it applied to Poseidon. no real explanation here as to why. Um, and then here we have a really interesting point of the hymn, because he is said to receive um, basically the third lot, right? Tritates moires. So this is a reference to a myth which is mentioned as early as the Iliad, in which Zeus, Hades, and Poseidon draw lots to decide who will rule over which part of the universe, right? So Hades gets the underworld, Zeus gets heaven, Poseidon gets the sea, and obviously the earth, so the surface of the earth, is cast as a sort of common ground between these three deities. Now, this is crucial because it kind of tells us something about the model of sovereignty deities, right? The sovereign gods, and how they are sort of equal ultimately, a sort of trinity, one might say. And this is paralleled, of course, in Vedic material. At first, we often see a couple of these. We see Mitra and Varuna as the two sovereigns. However, in the epics, we see that Mitra and Varuna coalesce not only with each other, which is kind of expected, but also with the god Yama, who is the god of death, and who is a clear parallel to Hades, right? They have similar mythology. We also have other comparenda for Yama in the Greek and the Roman mythologies, but still we have an underworld deity who also gets syncretized and closely associated with the sovereign gods both in India and in Greece. So it's probably something worth noticing and keeping in mind. So obviously, here, if you notice the requests that are asked by the people reciting hymn to Poseidon, you can actually notice that they're pretty much the same that are asked in the Orphic hymn to Zeus. So peace, health, and blameless kind of beatitude, right? Holborn is the state of the soul of initiates after death, which is supposed to be a state of bliss, a state of peace, presumably unity with the gods, right? So it's definitely interesting that Poseidon and Zeus get asked exactly the same things in different hymns, produced by the same temple or the same community of priests. Now, talking about Poseidon, it's kind of unavoidable to touch on two issues which are relevant. One is the etymology of his name. Now, some people will easily find an etymological proposal deriving the first part of the name from posis, which is ancient Greek for husband, but is also a cognate of Latin potis, Sanskrit pati, and other words in other Indo-European languages meaning Lord. So the first part of the name could be safely assumed to mean Lord. The real issue is the second half of the name, right? So some people try to interpret it as a derivative of da, which is supposed to be the Doric Greek word for earth, equivalent to Attic ge. Now, obviously, this does not follow any sound change, any regular sound change that we know of. And we really have no proof of da being a word for earth. We have no full sentence in which the word da means earth. It's only used as a sort of interjection, right? As a sort of cry, and it doesn't really have any usage as a word in a sentence. So some people try to find the same da in the name of Demeter, so obviously a goddess of grain, right? And tried to cast Poseidon as the husband of Demeter, of this goddess, whose name supposedly has the same particle meaning earth as the name of her supposed husband. Now, the real issue with that is that obviously, in the case of Demeter, or rather Greek Demeter, the first part of the name is clearly derived from the same root as Zea, which is ancient Greek for cereal. So presumably she's just the mother of cereal. It's pretty straightforward. And so this kind of leaves an open question on the da in Poseidon's name, which is Poseidon in earlier forms of Greek language. You can still see in the Orphic hymn that it's uncontracted. So we have an alpha and an omicron here because it's evocative. We would have an omega, so a long vowel in the nominative case. Still, you see the da is pretty straightforward. And so the obvious proposal that has been put forth by people who are into the Indo-European comparisons is that Poseidon is actually a cognate of Vedic Danunaspati. So Danunas is a genitive. It means of waters. It can also have other translations. And in fact, Griffith here translates it as liberal gifts. However, we do have the other possible translation of water. So it's interesting, right, that we have both a word starting with da, which is what we would look for if we were looking for cognate of the da in Poseidon. And then we have pati, which is generally agreed to be cognate with the first part of the name Poseidon. So I mean, we have the same components. We just need to switch their places around, and we get a word meaning Lord of Water. I mean, it's pretty straightforward, right? And what's even more interesting and makes the comparison valid, in my opinion, is that Danunaspati is applied here to Mitra and Varuna. This is a hymn of the Rig Veda for these two deities. So obviously, we see in the Rig Veda that oftentimes the same epithet is shared by Mitra and Varuna, even though technically it only fits one of them. So usually in mythology, Varuna is a member of the Asura group of deities. Some English translations have Titans as a translation of Asura, I think fittingly. And then Mitra is a member of the Deva group of deities. So this is the mythology. It's pretty straightforward. However, in the hymns, we often see that they are both said to be the two Asuras or the two Devas without much concern about which one is appropriate to which is a feature of Vedic elliptic dual. It's not supposed to be like an error or an innovation on the poet's part. It's kind of a feature uh, of when Vedic language has two elements and only needs to mention one in the dual case to imply both, such as saying the two sisters when actually meaning the sister and the brother, right? It's a feature of Vedic language. And so having Varuna addressed as Danunaspati, so a name which is clearly cognate, or at least it can very be fittingly be recognized as a cognate of Poseidon, and which means Lord of Water. I mean, it's pretty clear to me. I mean, it's a very solid etymology and doesn't require using a ghost word such as da, which is, I mean, pretty much not what some people would like it to have it etymologized as. So the second question discussing Poseidon as a Greek deity is that we often read of Poseidon as the more worshipped or most relevant deity in Mycenaean Greece, right? Mycenaean Greece, which is what the ancient Greeks would have called heroic Greece, so the Bronze Age Greece. Now, this is actually kind of a difficult claim to make because we have no mythological or ritual instructions from that period, from Mycenaean Greece. All Mycenaean texts are simply record keeping. And record keeping obviously can be helpful. So we know from that record keeping that Poseidon was receiving more offerings than other deities, more offerings than Zeus even. But even so, we really do not have any clue as to whether there was a particular theology, mythology, ritual connected to Poseidon, right? So it's also been speculated that since Poseidon is a god of earthquakes and tsunamis and these sort of calamities, obviously the number of sacrifices made to him increased during the last years of Mycenaean palaces being active, uh, precisely because they were being targeted by these natural phenomena and they were trying to avert them and to appease the god, which was relevant to this kind of situations. So it's definitely hard to assess whether Poseidon, the Mycenaean god, was really the most important god, really more important than Zeus on many levels. We definitely can say he was very important, and that definitely fits with the image of Varuna as kind of one in a binary of the two main deities, Mitra and Varuna, the two sovereigns of the other gods. So now we have seen the sort of pattern, so a duality of Mitra and Varuna, or Zeus and Poseidon among the Greeks and the Indians, and also how in each of these traditions we have an underworld deity, which is kind of the third added to this couple, right? So we have Yama in the Vedic tradition and Hades in the Greek tradition. So I think it's time to look at Roman tradition for any analog, right? And we do have actually one very interesting triad, or well, kind of a couple plus a third, if we can, uh, which actually helps us to compare even better to the Vedic and Greek situation. So here we have a passage from Pliny uh, saying basically that ancient Romans attributed basically daytime lightning bolts to Jupiter and nighttime thunderbolts to Summanus. So this sort of deity, which is sort of less understood. We have even Ovid who says, well, this is the feast day of Summanus, whoever Summanus is supposed to be. So Ovid, in his time, didn't have any reliable theology on this deity other than him being a god of nighttime thunderbolts, evidently. So here I say Jupiter because that's what the Latin text says. And here we have another passage of Sextus Pompeius at this time, who actually specifies Jupiter fulgur. Fulgur means literally thunderbolt. So I mean, it's not really much news, right? I mean, the god named Jupiter the Thunderbolt is the god hurling thunderbolts. I mean, who would have guessed? Um, but still, we have the duality of Jupiter as a god of daytime thunderbolt and Summanus as a god of nighttime thunderbolt. Now, what's interesting is that the daytime Jupiter can also be equated with another deity known as Deus Fidius. Now, Deus is pretty much a perfect formal match for Sanskrit Deva and for Old Norse Tur. So all of these three forms go back to Proto-European Deivos, which is not the same as Deus. They are from the same root, but they are not exactly the same form. So Deus is pretty straightforward. Fidius is a derivative of fides. Fides basically means trustworthiness. So here we have Deus, who is the patron of trustworthiness, and he was in fact a god invoked when swearing oaths. So we have this sort of duality, right? The sovereign god of daytime thunderbolts and swearing oaths and being overall trustworthy. And then we have the god of nighttime thunderbolts, which is more of an obscure figure, probably not, not perceived as being as trustworthy as the daytime thunderbolt deity, right? So more of a terrible sovereign. And to these two deities of daytime and nighttime thunderbolt, we can add a third deity, which is Wei Yowis. The name Wei Yowis is pretty much telling, right? Because Wei is a prefix meaning negation, right? It usually means that something is the opposite of what the following part of the word is encoding. So, for instance, grandis means big or grown up, and way grandis means little or small or not grown up. So way Jovis is literally the anti-Jupiter. It's sort of a reverse Jupiter, right? And he's also sometimes called Vedius, so the opposite Deus. But Deus and Jupiter are pretty much equated in ancient Roman tradition. There are some other opinions, especially the ones by Elias Stylo in the late Republic, but still they are, if anything, closely associated, if not equated. So obviously, having the anti-Jupiter was kind of a subject of speculation among poets and thinkers and prose writers. So he seems to be a sort of underworld deity. They understood him to be associated with the underworld, possibly with water to some degree, but possibly also with healing. There have been plenty of explanations both in antiquity and today, but definitely he's a god understood to be associated with the underworld. So as opposed to the celestial nature of both Jupiter as Deus Fidius, so the god of daytime sky, and also of Summanus, which is associated with the sky, but especially and exclusively the nighttime sky. So we have this sort of trinity, and the fact that it lines up so well both in Greece, Vedic India, and ancient Rome, even if the ancient Roman version was not influenced by the Greek, because there's no identification between Summanus and Poseidon ever proposed by the ancients. So we still have a perfect lineup. I mean, it's definitely worth noting and keeping in mind when reconstructing a Proto-Indo-European theology
Yes.
and religion, right?
And that's a good comment. I think that an interesting distinction. Poseidon is explicitly connected to the waters, while Summanus is explicitly connected to the night. Hence, both gods are equal to Varuna. So yeah, it seems like they've each gotten a different emphasis, but they can be traced back in this way to the same root, theoretically. But yeah, was there anything else you wanted to read from or touch on there, Josephus, or was that the
I
conclusion?
think that's all. Like I
Okay.
have read
Yeah.
pretty much
No, that's great.
everything. I don't know if we have to bring up the other issues of Varuna, especially like the fertility issue. Then we have to read the
Yeah.
relevant passages
Okay.
later.
We can go to that in a moment. So I just wanted to, while we're on the Greek and Roman material, this passage from my book, I just think it's interesting to outline some of this a bit more, and just how this pairing also seems to appear in the Iliad heroes. Of course, you could say that for multiple of these gods, but this one's kind of at the forefront with the brothers Agamemnon and Menelaus, and so we see this in different legendary versions of the myths, essentially, such as the Mahabharata heroes, where the gods are embodied or incarnated in the epic heroes. And in the Mahabharata version, as we'll touch on in a moment, as Dumazil argues, it seems to be that father and son, Pandu and Yudhishthira, are the incarnations of the Varuna type, or of Varuna himself, and then of Mitra Dharma, as Josephus just described this concept of Dharma as sort of the total sovereign, but that Yudhishthira, he seems to be embodying the Mitra, Zeus, daylight sky sovereign mythos, narrative mythos more so, even though he is explicitly from the god Dharma. He's incarnating Dharma. that seems to be a stand-in for the Mitra type narrative more so than, but at the same time, a totality. But in any case, we seem to have father and son, Pandu and Yudhishthira, as the Varuna and Mitra types in Dumazeal's scheme. And that's interesting because, of course, Pandu as the father arrives first. He's the sovereign before Yudhishthira. So chronologically, they're in the correct order. Pandu then, becomes cursed and has to pass on the sovereignty. He becomes aged as well, of course, and then Yudhishthira, receives the baton, receives the sovereignty to carry on the later half of that mythos. So we have father and son, older and younger. In the Greek Iliad, it seemed to me at least that instead of father and son, you have two brothers. But this can still embody the same concept because I believe it was true, and you correct me if I'm wrong on this, but I believe Agamemnon is the older brother. Is that mentioned, Josephus?
I'm not sure it's mentioned, but yeah, it looks like Agamemnon is, even if not the older, but I think he's also the older, but he's definitely the more powerful out of the two, right?
Yeah.
He's sort of one who can leverage all of Greece and not just Sparta to fight for Menelaus.
Yeah, and setting the stage for the war, especially, there is description that I touch on in my book of Agamemnon's sort of the sort of wars that set the stage that connect to Agamemnon in bringing things together, rallying. He's the commander in chief of the totality of the Greek army that they bring together, and that sort of thing. And then, but Menelaus is also there as this paired brother with him, who carries a different specific mythos that aligns with Yudhishthira and the Mitra type. So I think you have that there. And I wanted to just read this passage where it seems to be that Menelaus is embodying the Mitra type and Agamemnon the Varuna type pretty explicitly in what they do and how they're treated. And one of the key things is that Mitra also comes to embody in himself the contract of various types. So he himself is like he is the god of oaths and contracts, but it's like he himself is that contract, and that meaning, the meaning of his name, even then in some branches, perhaps it's in the Ironic, it comes to mean like friend, so friendship. So the contract, oath, alliance, etc. It is like the embodiment of a friendship. A friendship is that bond of contract between parties. And so that Mitra embodies that. And so that seems to play out with Menelaus and Varuna. So at one point in the Iliad, Pandarus attacks Menelaus while they are in the midst of a truce, or a temporary truce of some kind. And of course, Athena tricks and goads Pandarus to shoot an arrow at Menelaus, and it wounds Menelaus. And we have then Mitra speaking out in defense of the truce and the friendship, referring to retribution for the breaking of the friendship. It's all very Mitra type. And then right after that, you have kind of a dynamic between Agamemnon and Menelaus, embodying their attitudes towards revenge for the breaking of such contracts and that sort of thing. So in Iliad 3.354, after or right when Menelaus enters the scene during the truce, I think this is right before he gets wounded, he says, "Let solemn oaths bring friendship between us. And then let my hand strike him down." And then referring to anyone who would break the truce that is present, he says, "Let my hand strike him down, so that future generations shall shudder at harming a host who shows them friendship." So he's embodying the friendship, the truce, and also the retribution for the breaking of it, because he's the guardian of it. And he very much, even though he is this embodiment of peace and friendship, he is also very strongly connected to the retribution for the breaking of it and retributive acts in general. And then it says, and then we have, let's see, after Menelaus' wounding, Agamemnon comments on, quote, "The Trojans who in wounding you, Menelaus, have trampled their solemn oaths underfoot." So right there, it's like in wounding Menelaus during this truce, they have wounded their solemn oath itself, because Menelaus, as the Mitra, is the embodiment of the oath and the contract and the truce. So wounding Menelaus is metaphorically wounding that oath and truce. Yet an oath over clasped hands with the blood of lambs and offerings of pure wine is a thing not so easily annulled. Though Zeus delays punishment, he will punish fully in the end. The oath breakers will pay with their lives, and their wives and children too. Unquote. And after this, Menelaus, even though he himself embodies requital throughout the whole Iliad, he is on a mission of requital. He then tells his brother Agamemnon to, quote, "Be calm." And this is in Iliad 4.155 through 184. And so this embodies that dynamic. You can see Agamemnon urgent for very dramatic, destructive retribution and enforcement of that broken oath. And Menelaus being the more calm one, even though they have this shared mission of retribution. And then as Dumézil describes this dynamic of Mitra and Varuna, he says, quote, "Mitra is the sovereign under his reasoning aspect, luminous, ordered, calm, benevolent, priestly. Varuna is the sovereign under his attacking aspect, dark, inspired, violent, terrible, warlike." And that's Mitra Varuna, page 71. And then, fascinatingly, this is just summed up in the Taittiriya Samhita in the Vedic tradition, where the merciful Mitra is said to pacify the cruel-minded Varuna, exactly as we just saw Menelaus pacifying Agamemnon. And he says, quote, the Taittiriya Samhita says, quote, "Mitra makes peaceful the cruel-minded Varuna," in Taittiriya Samhita 2.1.9.5. So I think that shows that we have a Varuna and Mitra, of course, in even the legendary heroes, and it is Agamemnon and Menelaus, and that they are still carrying forward this dynamic where Agamemnon is embodying that inspired violence, commander-in-chief, who kind of sets the stage and organizes all the troops for the war, and then Menelaus, the more calm, serene sovereign aspect, who pacifies, balances out this energy, but then also sort of carries through in the end of the story, carries through that retribution in an ordered kind of way, creating victory in some and creating victory and peace into the future. So yeah, hopefully that gives an idea of Agamemnon as another point to look at for this question, which I think is fascinating. So what was the next step? So next, building onto that, is this question of legendary heroes is important. And so Pandu, as Dumézil argues, is also this Varuna type. He also is the king at first. He has to go on. He's involved in wars that sort of set the stage, set up the nation, and he also has this specific mytheme, which seems to become directly relevant to the Celtic parallels, okay, or the Celtic parallel. And that is the fact that Pandu comes upon two mating deer in the forest. He then shoots one of them, right? Is that right, Josephus? He shoots one of the deer?
Yes, precisely.
Yes. And so
The male deer, basically, the
she's the
stag.
male deer, essentially. So it's this kind of it's this sort of perennial symbolism of the deer's mating in the forest. And he violates this for some reason. Um, his overflowing violent energy, perhaps, that is aligned with the Varunian type. I'm not sure. But in any case, he incurs this sin because it is a sin, and he incurs a curse for doing this action. This curse is that he cannot essentially be passionate with a woman, with his wife, or he will. Let's see. I'm forgetting now the outcome. He will die if he does.
Yeah, he
Right.
will die during the sexual intercourse.
Right. Right. Exactly. So, because of this curse, not only is this a dangerous outcome in the future that could happen to him, but it's also he's under a curse now. Now he's a cursed sovereign. It sort of destroys his ability to operate naturally and fully embody the perfect sovereign, I think. And so, because of this, he gives up his sovereignty and goes. Josephus was just reminding me the details of this. He goes to a hermitage in the woods. Is that correct? And he gives up his
Yeah, he
sovereignty
goes
to his
to live
son
as a sort of
Yudhishthira.
hermit, yeah.
Okay. Okay. Right. Right.
Because he obviously cannot fulfill the duty of having children that will continue the royal line.
Exactly. Exactly. Yes. Well said. So his sexuality, his virility, which is core to what a sovereign is, and continuing the line, it has been damaged, cursed. It cannot operate, and so yeah, it's this thing. He has to give up his sovereignty, and he is the sovereign. That is the passing on to the next half of the cosmic year, of course, to the Mitra type, to the Yudhishthira. But also, we see this mirrored in Varuna himself. And so this is one reason you can kind of verify that Pandu is embodying a Varunian mythos, is that we have Varuna himself in the Atharva Veda, and he very explicitly is said to lose his virility, his sexual, his genital, whatever virility, and the Gandharvas dig a special plant for him to heal him of his lost virility. So, Josephus, could you explain that and read from that passage that you have there?
Of course. So we have the passage here. Thee that the Gandharva dug for Varuna, whose virility was dead, thee here do we dig a penis erecting herb. Now the passage is pretty explicit. The Whitney translation is definitely on the more explicit side as opposed to maybe the Griffith translation. But what is clear is that Varuna, in this context, has a loss of his um, generative masculine power, right, which is so fundamental for a king, right? Would not be possible for a king to be one if he's unable to fight and or unable to procreate. And this obviously also applies to the sovereign of the night, which is Varuna. So here the which is being addressed is the Soma plant, right? So the Soma plant, which is guarded by the Gandharva, and so the Gandharva kind of are the ones who can bring it to Varuna to heal him. It would be definitely nice to know more about this episode of Varuna losing his virility, but even if we don't know much, the outline is pretty clear, and it definitely is interesting. It's interesting to see it paralleled in the epics, not only in the Vedic epics, in the character of Pandu, who obviously is cursed not to be able to have sex on the penalty of instantaneous death. Obviously, death cannot apply to a deathless god such as Varuna, but it can definitely apply to a human hero such as Pandu. But we also have something similar to Agamemnon, not in the curse itself, but in the mode of death of Agamemnon, which is pretty much paralleling that of Pandu. So Pandu has two wives, right? One is named Kunti, and the other is named Madri. Now these are more like sort of regional ethnonyms So they mark that they are princesses from these regions and these families, as opposed to being proper names of the wives. So Kunti is the main wife, and Madri is always the one with a sort of secondary role compared to Kunti. And Kunti is actually the one who leverages the deities to be able to conceive children on her own without needing Pandru to impregnate her and thus dying. She later reveals the ritual to invoke the gods to Madri. So both Kunti and Madri manage to give birth to children without resulting in their husband's death. However, Pandru ultimately is taken over by lust, and in this lustful state, he has an intercourse with Madri and obviously dies on the spot, as one would imagine. And so the two wives sort of have a talk about what to do with the sort of the funeral, right? Because it was traditional for at least one of the wives to throw herself in the sacrificial pyre together with her husband, well, the corpse of her husband. And so Madri argues that she is the one who ought to jump into the fire and die together with Pandu. And she says that she's okay doing this because she knows that Kunti will love her children just as if they were her own. Now, obviously, we have huge differences compared to the story of Agamemnon, but it's definitely interesting that Agamemnon dies while he's having presumably intercourse or some sort of close contact with Cassandra, which was his concubine, war slave, a war captive, taken home as a sort of sex slave, among other things. And they are killed together at the hands of the other wife, Clytemnestra. So she is the okay. Why is this thing opening up? Clytemnestra, which is the sister of Helen of Troy, by the way. So we still have the motif of this character of this Varunian sovereign dying as a result, or well, partially as a result, but at the very least during the act of having sexual intercourse with a secondary wife or concubine. And the concubine or secondary wife also dies either on the spot or in a way which is closely connected with the death of the Varunian sovereign. So even though the Vedic and the Greek myths have taken largely different paths and different ways to elaborate on this sort of structure, of this sort of underlying framework of the Varunian hero dying together with the secondary wife or concubine as a result of having sex or as during the act of having sex, we still have the same motive, the same kind of very peculiar circumstances. I mean, I'm pretty sure that it's not common to find other myths in which a hero dies during sexual intercourse, let alone having two characters which clearly parallel both each other and the same deity type, which is the Varuna type in this case.
No, yeah, I fully agree with what you're saying, that those scenes parallel, even though they have differences, of course, but you can see that they may come from a shared source. If the rest of the Agamemnon and Pandu stories can be traced in a general sense, then those endings are quite coincidental as well, how they die. So I definitely think that is a strong point that I agree with, at least. So we have very clearly this mythos of the virility of the Varunian type being lost, being somehow cursed or lost, and this in both cases, you would imagine it's not fully explained, I think, in the Varuna passage, but in the Pandu passage, it is, in the Pandu story, that this affects their power of sovereignty as well. Their virility is at the core of their sovereignty, their ability to have offspring and lineage, but also just their virile power. And so, because of this, it can, I think, it's strongly there in the Vedic tradition with these two different variations. You can see that the Pandu and Varuna, it's kind of the same idea, but told differently in two variations of a core theme. And then we can kind of go to the Celtic parallel, which will get fleshed out. But with this single parallel, we can see that among the Tuatha there is, when they first arrive, a first king. So this is the concept I go back to over and over again, that that the Varuna type often appears as the first king in some kind of context, in some kind of bounded context, because he is that king of the night. The night is actually the first half of the cosmic year, and so the Varuna type often appears first in some sense, and then is followed by the Mitra type as the culminating sovereign who takes care of the second half of the cosmic year. And so, yeah, we have among the Tuatha when they first arrive, that Nuada is the king initially. Nuada then later, he in a specific circumstance, he loses the sovereignty and then ultimately gets killed. And in among that back and forth, of course, Lu takes over and rules essentially the second half of the year, more or less, cosmically speaking. And so you can map out just from that narrative alone that you have the two major sovereigns are Nuada and then Lu, with of course Bress in the middle there as this sort of conflicted temporary sovereign. But you can then kind of look at Nuada a bit closer, because he is that first sovereign of the Tuatha, at least when they arrive. And what is then interesting is that the way he loses his sovereignty as well, just like Pandu has to give up his sovereignty, and he loses it by having his arm severed in the first battle of Moritura when he fights against Shreng. Okay, so he loses a limb, and it is specifically said that he cannot be the sovereign if he is imperfect. So he has lost his perfect sovereign power in some sense that is embodied in his arm that he loses, and this, for some complex reason, forces him to abdicate the throne. You might think it's just an arm, but there is, at least according to the stories, an idea that the sovereign must have this perfection, and in the Irish story, it is embodied in that arm. So I think that there's a pretty clear potential parallel there, where Varuna loses the virility of his genitive member, and this parallels the Irish losing of the arm, in theory. Even though these are obviously strongly different body parts, they both connect to the power of sovereignty that is lost by this first sovereign. And so you could theorize that one or the other changed the original story to a different limb that embodied that same sort of core symbolism. Perhaps the Celtic Irish version was a sort of cleaning up, moving away from sexual symbolism to an arm. Perhaps not. It's hard to really say for sure. But either way, they both kind of cause the same narrative outcome, where the first king loses dramatically something connected to one of the power of his limb, and then has to that causes him to lose his ability to rule as well. So right there you have a framework for Nuada as Varuna, but I think this becomes even more sort of clinched by looking at the fact that he is especially Nuada's British parallel, essentially Nodin's, is intensely depicted as a water sovereign, a god of the waters. So, for instance, let me just pull this up real quick. But yeah, does that make sense, or is there anything I'm leaving out in that description?
I mean, I think it makes sense, of course. I mean, we kind of agree, so on, like, as a baseline, we kind of have the same references. So maybe if the commenters find that there's anything worth re-explaining or elucidating,
Mhm.
I think they should tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. So,
And one of the comments is interesting here. Nuada's arm becoming silver is a possible nocturnal symbol. I
mhm.
mean, definitely interesting.
I've always thought that possibly as well. I mean,
I mean,
if you think of the light of the moon, or if you think of a constellation of stars in the sky, there are different things at night that could
yes,
be a
silver is definitely
silver.
lunar, so
Yeah,
definitely interesting that they picked silver as opposed to maybe gold or
right.
whatever other metal.
Yeah, that's a great point. That is a very good point. I think there is potential there. Just the concept of being the first king. I think if you go back far enough, at least, I think you're going to be aligning with nocturnal symbolism, because that was kind of the original concept of the early half of the cosmic year. But nonetheless, so John Carey describes Nodens in Britain and Ireland in his article of that name. And he says, he says that the Romano-British Nuada, who is called Nodens, is shown at his shrine at Lydney Park. There is this amazing shrine of Romano-British, evidence in Lydney Park, and it is to Nodens, and it shows him depicted riding a chariot across the sea. Of this temple, Carey states that, quote, the inscriptions identify Nodens with Mars, and the iconographic evidence at Lydney associates him with water and with dogs. And that's from Carey, page 20. And then he says, quote, several images of dogs have been found, him, as well as bronze plaques depicting water monsters, fishermen, and ichthyo-centaurs, unquote. And then, as Guillaume Udaye, how do you pronounce that name? Udayer, it's a French name, points out, according to Nennius, the waters of Llyn Llywn, located not far from the sanctuary of Lydney Park, dedicated to Nodens, would swell if one got too close, and it was in the waters that the Welsh primal salmon resided. He explains that in this temple overlooking the Severn and the expanse of the estuary opposite the tidal bore, there is also a statue of a fisherman harpooning a salmon. Udaye further points out that Llydd, Llydd is the Welsh name of Nuada, also assumed to be also Neath, but the assumption is that Llydd comes from an original name Neath, which would align with Nuada. He is described going into a tub of cold water at one point as well. And let's see, Carey also says, quote, only in Wales, by contrast, is a connection with clouds apparent to this god type. This is evidently due simply to the survival in Welsh of Neath with the meaning mist or haze, from Carey, page 21. Okay, so basically we have a whole shrine with Nodens, and he essentially looks like Poseidon or Neptune riding his chariot across the waters. I don't know if anybody has seen this incredible engraving at the site, but let's see. Yeah, I'm gonna pull this up I should have had this ready because it's such a good image. But either way, we have all these water animals. He's at this he's right by the estuary and the tidal bore, and essentially if you just saw this on its own, you would think it's a depiction of Neptune or something like that. They noted that he's being identified with Mars, but clearly he is water associated. So I think this is just an issue of sort of interpretatio Romano being a little bit indirect, if we might say. Essentially, it's accurate to say that the Varuna type is a god of war, like we've been describing. So it's probably touching on that war aspect of Nodens, the terrible aspect, but clearly he is also this Neptunian type of god, this Poseidon type of god. And here I'm going to just pull this up real quick. Okay. So if you can see this in the center, he is riding a sort of chariot across the waters, and there are water figures all around him. There are other pieces where it shows fish and that sort of thing. Okay, so it is clearly a water shrine. There is also even, it seems to be at this shrine, there's a setup for a sort of practice involving sending one's dreams, or sort of like they have these dream shrines where you're essentially sending prayers and dreams, and you sleep there and send your sort of dreams to the god below. If that is true, then it is another nocturnal alignment for Nodens, of course. So hopefully that makes sense. Let's see. Yeah, I was hoping I could find the exact description of the sort of dream interpretation. But nonetheless, I believe I mentioned it in my video on Nuada anyways. Yeah, and there are other points connecting even Nuada to waters. I think we have, let's see. The island of Nuada is called Findias, and the druidic teacher who comes from Findias is named Wishkias. Of course, this is Uiscias, and that most likely comes from Wishke, Uisce, which is the word meaning water. So it seems that the druid who comes from Nuada's own island has a name meaning essentially water, something related to water. Okay, so that is, I think, some of the connections are a little bit fragmentary around Nuada himself, but as Carey also goes into in his article on Nuada and Nechten, Nuada and Nechten become conflated as Nuada Necht, and we know very clearly that Nechten is a god of waters, of the waters of his well. So it seems to be this conflation of water-type gods that happened over time. And so from all these different angles, we can start to see that there are indeed strong water alignments to especially Nodens, but also to Nuada himself, and also nocturnal alignments to Nodens at his shrine, and there are possible other sort of nocturnal connections that I mention in my book, but they're rather fragmentary as well. Okay, so when you put that together, I think the position of Nuada as the first king is a bit unmistakable, and it points to him caring for this sort of Pandu role where he indeed loses his sovereignty by one of his limbs being affected, and that limb sort of embodies that sovereign power. And Nuada does indeed get that limb healed by the healer, by Dienkecht and his son, and there is this ungodly, uncanny real arm that is created by the son of Dienkecht, the healer, which is given to Nuada. But it's too much too powerful. It's too uncanny in a sense, too unnatural, right? And so, in any case, ultimately, I believe ultimately, if I'm not if I'm not switching this around, he then ends up with the silver arm as the less unnatural healing that he receives from Dean Kecht. It's one or the other that comes last, but he gets his limb healed, as Varuna also gets his virility healed by the Gandharvas. And then, of course, Nuada does die, but he dies in battle as far as we have it recorded. So, but the same process happens, and then his sovereignty is passed off to Bress and then ultimately to Lu, who seems to carry forward that Mitra type. So you have kind of the alignment in a very nice organized order that is recognizable with the other Indo-European parallels that we have. So it seems to be this deeply rooted set. And okay, so I think that sums it up. I do think there is something, deep about the arm symbolism, and it may be a nocturnal moon or star symbolism as well that goes pretty deep, even though it's different than, for example, the genitals of Varuna. It seems to connect deeply to his nature as well, regardless. So there is a lot there that can be looked at. So also, people were asking about Zeus and whether he's Indra or Mitra and that sort of thing. And so I do just want to say we're kind of building up to that. So we are overlapping with some Mitra points in this stream because it's inevitable kind of to explain Varuna in contrast. But we are hoping, if we have time, to do a full stream on Mitra, and that will be heavily discussing Zeus for sure and Jupiter. And so it is kind of it's one of my missions to clarify Zeus as primarily a Mitra type god and sovereign. So obviously he's a complex sovereign because he culminates a lot of things and he becomes the totality. So therefore he absorbs, he may be syncretized with other non-Indo-European gods or aspects and cults and practices that all may be happening. But at the Indo-European core, I really want to argue and show how this is the case, that Zeus actually has this Indo-European Mitra mythos at his core. And the problem is that most people have not understood the Mitra mythos at all. If you don't understand, if you don't even know what the Mitra mythos is, you're not going to recognize it in Zeus. And so just want to put that out there, and we will have to just put that on the shelf to explain it in a full dedicated thing. But it is all about the narrative myths and also the epithets of Zeus and how those actually align with these Mitra types, such as Yudhishthira that we mentioned, the legendary hero, and also understanding Celtic mythology. You can understand Lu, and from there see how that is reflected in the Mitra type and also Zeus. So are there any points I'm forgetting here? There is a key overlap, of course, with Varuna and Rudra that's sort of mysterious. There is the fact that Varuna gains his sovereignty from Prajapati, so he's continuing Prajapati's sovereignty in a sense, and Prajapati teaches certain mystical mantras that help the gods, including Varuna, and this could parallel the Sleeth and Cephalus story, which I would like to make a video on in the future. But it seems that Sleeth in the Welsh stories is embodying a certain Varunian mythos there, even when he receives these instructions from Cephalus to rid himself of various sort of afflictions that are afflicting his kingdom. That seems to be a probable Varunian mythos as well that can be explained through that lens. So I think that has interesting potential, at least, but it would take some more detail going into. Is there anything on Odin that we should jump to next? And Arno, would you like to point to a starting point for discussing Odin as Varuna, or what are your thoughts on how should we approach Odin?
So, as we've discussed many times and talked about in the Rudra streams, Odin's a composite deity for sure, with his core mythic identity being Rudra. But we do see myths where he does parallel, like Pushan Kian, where he's stealing the mead from Gunloth and her father. Hopefully we get to one. We're gonna get to all of them eventually.
We are trying to. Yes.
Yeah. So we'll probably get into that when we're done with the sovereign ones. I don't see a problem with that.
We could, yeah.
But aside from Odin simply being king of the Aesir and his role in the Aesir-Vanir War, I don't really see very many narrative myths where he's in the place of Varuna. That doesn't mean that he's not.
Right.
It just means that he's an incredibly unique case of multiple gods that are otherwise distinct from one another in the eyes of the worshippers of other cultures. It's not the case in this one, and there are other examples of composite deities, but they don't compare to the complexity and the nuance of Odin. So the vast majority of his narrative myths, and even his names, because I have read through and compared and researched his names in the sources and etymology sites, they all seem to reflect his Rudra identity that's at his core. But in your Horse Twins Angus's Freyr video, you go over one of the comparisons between Freyr, Angus, and the Ushvins, in that they earn their place amongst the society of gods, and either by magic or verbal trickery or overcoming a warrior, like I believe the Ushvins, and even Pryderi in Arthurian mythos, defeat the Thunderer hero or god in a contest and earn their place among the gods and are able to participate in their sacrifices. Whereas Freyr and Angus specifically employ, it's like magic and verbal trickery, and then they end up becoming part of the society of gods. In Angus's case, he takes over Elkvar's burial mound, and this is very similar to the Vanir, which includes Freyr and the other third function gods, battling the Aesir with their magic, but they come to a stalemate and eventually they trade hostages and sort of invite the Vanir into the ranks of the Aesir. In that way, that's the most obvious or closest to a mythic parallel I can see between Odin and the other Varunian gods.
But he is that sovereign holding the place of the first function.
Yes,
Exactly
absolutely.
like
his...
Elkvar, who is Nuada. Elkvar is another name of Nuada, to clarify. And yes, he is in that story, in that position. Exactly. So yeah, that's a great point.
I think his sovereignty very much reflects a Varunian nature rather than a Rudraic one.
Right, so because Rudra isn't usually the ruling sovereign of the society of gods. He's on the outskirts, transcendent of society in a way.
You see a bit of a difference, like I wouldn't say like a split where there's like a seam between certain images, like images of Odin, but there you have this side of Odin where he's a very wild on the outskirts of society, like leader of the wild hunt. But then, so he's survived the jive, and a lot of other people highlight how it's mainly aristocratic cults that would worship Odin, but it would also be like outlaws and thieves and people like Olheithnars and berserkers would also be engaged in Odin cults, but also sometimes because there's overlap with the main and there. But
Right.
you see this, there's like the absolute bottom of the societal hierarchy and the absolute top of the societal hierarchy both have Odinic cults, and I think that would be very well explained by this Rudra dash Varuna mythic identity.
Right.
Despite
sense. Yeah, despite the lack of, this is what I've come to the same exact place as you, where it's like, first of all, Dumasile puts this idea out into circulation that Odin should be Varuna, or he thinks Odin is Varuna strongly. He calls him, the magical sovereign in a sense. Magical. He obviously mentioned shamans in that passage I read about Celeritas, versus like the priestly legalistic sovereign who is Mitra. But he's putting that idea into circulation also along with a premise that was flawed, which we've gone into, how this one-eyed concept, which he rests a lot of that argument on, the one-eyed mythos is actually, or the odd-eyed mythos at least, and the one-eyed mythos seems more frequently, almost always, connected to Rudra types, especially when you bring in Celtic material, of course. Once you understand Celtic material, which you should, because it's the closest to the Germanic, really, and they're bordering and overlapping in some ways. You can see more clearly that the Finn Gaul type, Finn aka Gaul, Finn/Gaul, is the one-eyed god. And he is the Rudra type. So this sort of like throws a wrench in Dumasile's argument of what the Varuna type should look like, because he was imagining Odin as Varuna, and therefore Varuna as this shamanistic god. But he's clearly mixing that conception. He's mixing it up with what's actually a lot of Rudra material in Odin. Okay, so we should make that clear that Dumasile needs to be sort of like analyzed on this point and improved on, clarified, right? So hopefully we can get a clearer sight, because when you understand that the one-eyed, and even most of all of the shamanistic, quote unquote, esoteric motifs around Odin are actually have a stronger claim to being Rudra type, this one-eyed or odd-eyed mystical, esoteric outsider god, then when you kind of take the myths out that you can strongly parallel to Finn/Gaul or to Rudra, or to like the Greek Rudra who's Apollo or Cronus, then what is left, there isn't much that is really clearly paralleling Varuna, especially in narrative myths. It's like almost everything can be accounted for in terms of Rudra. Everything in Odin can be accounted for in terms of Rudra or certain connected gods like Agni and Pushan, who we've gone into, and perhaps Brihaspati. Very specific narrative myths that you can nail down to those figures. But then it leaves this open question of, is there really a Varunian aspect to Odin? And how well can we define that? Because that's important. And so yeah, like you mentioned, the strongest point of alignment seems to be this role of sovereignty itself. However, even that could be an expression of a Rudra type sovereignty taking center stage theoretically. But I still think it's a strong argument that it could be coming from a Varuna aspect, like you said. Especially like that myth you pointed to, that is a narrative myth. The Iservanner war motif, where who is the sovereign being challenged? It is Odin, with Thor along with him, of course. And the sovereign in the equivalent narrative myth is Elkvar, aka Nuada, in the Celtic. So you do have a direct Varunian parallel for that myth. So that is a good starting point. But it's this very curious question. Like, I still think there's probably a Varunian aspect there, in part because there isn't another different god who would more clearly take the Varunian role, I think. And Varuna is such an important god, such as Poseidon, that it seems like he should be one of these main sovereigns like Odin. So it makes sense that there is this. It's just probably this overlap between Rudra and Varuna, and they became kind of treated as just as Odin, right?
Yeah, there may be some names of Odin that could be seen through Viridian. So we know from the Vedas, mainly Varuna, but also Mitra Varuna are associated with bindings,
right.
And like fetters, whether this is like sin or punishment for crimes,
right? And that is a point Dumasil brings up. Which
yes,
yeah.
Odin has names where he's called like the Haft Loosener and things like that. So,
right. So that makes perfect sense. That would make perfect sense.
But this is also not specifically a Varunian thing. It's more of like a sovereign god thing, because Fortress of Lu uses that to connect Lu and Odin.
Yeah, of course.
So you got to be a little bit careful with
you can go too far with this binding concept, like you said. But
it would make sense for whoever sits on the throne would be like, the dictator, such things like that. But there could be potentially there. I wondered if you could use Odin as one of the potential fathers for Tyr as a Varunian thing, since most of the time Varuna is a father of Tyr.
Well, my argument, of course, would be that Odin as potential father of Tyr is his Pushanic side.
Yeah, I was going to bring
Pushan / Rudra, because it's like this combined Pushan Rudra really in Finn McKinley, aka Kian. But yeah, that is a good question. And then there's at least one reference to like praying to Odin for sea travels, which we've touched on before. Do you recall by chance where
I don't remember exactly the citation for it, but I think it's Regan's Mall.
Okay, yeah.
It's Regan's Mall. I forget the stanza.
Right. No, but
they pray to Odin to calm the seas.
So
yes,
that to me does seem like a strong possible remnant.
Yeah. Although to be fair, it could also be related to travel as a Pushanic activity. So without it, there's always this sort of underlying question of which traits are Varunian, Rudraic, Pushanic,
absolutely,
and how they kind of intermingle into an extremely coherent whole, and maybe even sometimes they overlap with each other, maybe in other branches, and so they have a clear parallel in Odin in the Germanic cultures.
Right, but there is this possibility that Varuna and Rudra were the Varuna and Rudra types within Germanic society, so not under those names, but that those types were so overlapping to begin with. They both can be called terrible gods, of course. They both are gods of war, and that sort of terrible energy. They both are actually gods of the night portion. Like the Rudra type god is connected to the night half. In different contexts, in the Celtic material, the equivalent is, and then of course, there's all these things where clearly, Dumasil saw some sort of shamanic, magical aspect in Varuna himself to connect to Odin. Although I forget exactly if he was stretching things or not to do so. But yeah, there are these possible things where it could be that they were a lot esoterically overlapping so much that they became seen as one. What's interesting about that is we have in Celtic material a possible example of that happening more on the surface that we can track a little bit, because we have in Irish and also in Welsh, we have, of course, the Rudra type god, who is Finn MacCool in Irish, and Gwyn ap Nudd in Welsh material. But Finn MacCool's other surname that he's given is Finn Ua Nuada. Finn Ua Nuadat, or so it's Nuadat in the version where this is mentioned. But Finn is being described as descendant of Nuada. So in an epithet. So that is an exact equivalent, of course, of Gwyn ap Nydd. Gwyn ap Nydd equals Finn ua Nuada. It's the exact same names in the two different languages. So what you have is that the Finn and Gwyn names and type are being tied very strongly by their surnames in these instances to the Varuna type, to the Nuada, aka Nydd type gods. So they're kind of being bound together in a way to show, why is it so emphasized that Gwyn is ap Nydd? Why is it so emphasized that Gwyn is son of Nydd, aka Sleeve, and yeah, so because of the consistency there, and because of the conceptual and role overlaps between Nuada and Finn themselves, John Carey argues in this article that I already cited about Nodens, he argues that it's almost like the Nuada Nodens type is being treated as continuous with the Finn/Gwyn type. He explicitly comes to this conclusion, so that he says Nodens Nodens must have been almost like seen as Gwyn and Nydd, Gwyn and these types combined as one almost, because he says they're both connected to waters and healing. They're both connected to canines strongly, of course. They're connected to fish. They're connected to hunting, along with that, and connected to war, of course, etc., etc. And they're connected to each other. Gwyn is connected to Nydd. Finn is connected to Nuada. So yeah, he comes to this conclusion that they're very strongly overlapping, at very least, to the point where it's almost like Nodens may be a concept of them as one. It is, of course, speculative on his part, but it shows that even looking at this from a different perspective, where he's not looking at the comparative evidence, he sees a heavy overlap between the Nuada and Finn types, that is the Varuna and Rudra types. So if that's happening in the Celtic material, it may be evidence that happened in a full identification in the Germanic case. It may be support for that idea. Along with that, let's see, there's one other aspect of that. Okay, so in the story of Fionn McCool, when he catches the salmon of knowledge, it is he is the sort of assistant there of a figure called Finnecus or Finnicus. And Finnecus, of course, bears the name Finn himself. Finnecus means like Finn the seer. And Finnicus is this older figure who's trying to catch the fish and does catch it. And then Fionn McCool is the boy helping him to watch the fish while it cooks. And but then Finn touches the fish while it's cooking and burns his finger and tastes the fish, and the boy gains all the knowledge from the salmon of knowledge, and Finnicus gets none, of course. But what's interesting is there is a reference in the material, which unfortunately I didn't bring it to my own attention for this stream, but it is implied that Finnicus is really Nuada. Okay, so it is implied that this name, the name of Finn's sort of mentor here, what have you, is he's actually Nuada. It's another connection, another close connection of Nuada and Finn, if that's true. But what's also fascinating to me is that his name isn't Nuada. His name is Finnicus. So if this is true that Finnicus is Nuada, it's an example of a Nuada who's named Finn. He's named Finnicus, but he's quite literally named Finnecus. So okay, so that would have to be 100% confirmed that is true that Finnicus is Nuada, but why is he actually bearing the name of Finn? Of course, Finn can just mean poet, can just mean seer in a generic sense, but these are heavily coded mythic narratives, so it is also something you can't fully ignore and should take into account, as the whole narrative of that salmon of knowledge is like different aspects of Finn himself, passing on the totality of knowledge to his own self. It's like this circle, as we described in a previous stream, where the salmon of knowledge itself is Fintan, actually. And Fintan is really Finn's own higher self. So somehow it is this circle where Finnicus is this elder mentor of the young boy Finn, who then catches the salmon Fintan, who is his own higher wisdom, and consumes it and absorbs it. So it is of course an esoteric what do you call it, metaphor, you know. It is an esoteric tale embodying something complex theologically, but it carries this possibility that Finnicus, who may be Nuada himself, is just being treated as an aspect of that larger Finn type. Okay, so hopefully that possibility makes sense, and it is not. Unfortunately, you know, I wish we had more things to confirm that, but it seems like a possibility there, along with the other overlaps of Nuada and Finn. Okay, yeah. So that's really all there is to say on that. That just supports the possibility that Odin may indeed have this Varunian aspect, and it's just being treated as the sovereign side of the dark sovereign, the dark terrible one who is Rudra, you know. And so there is some sort of intertwining. I think you can definitely say there's an intertwining of these aspects, especially in the Celtic. So what other points have we covered it all?
I just wanted, I don't know if you elaborated on this earlier, but the overlap between them with the dark half, I would specify that Varna would be like the dark half of the day being the night, and Rudra would be like the dark half of the year being the winter, and even higher than that being like, if you're familiar with Hindu time units, Pralaya versus Kalpa. But
yeah, Rudra has a more transcendent outside of the cycle kind of.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's better. Really, also that I think I saw some questions about, you know, relating Poseidon Summanus with Varuna versus night and or waters associations. I personally think that those would have been one and the same originally, and that the differences that you see expressed, it depends on geographical areas. Like obviously there's a lot of Greek society was mainly very insular. They were very seafaring society. Romans not so much until a little bit later, at least when they were Italic tribes. They weren't so seafaring.
Yeah, and as I mentioned you weren't here for this, but reading the summary of the Vedic material, there is connection of Varuna to the oceans, but not extremely heavy. It's more a stronger emphasis on Varuna being connected to the celestial waters, which are the celestial waters of the night sky. So the celestial waters in the sky are entirely overlapped with the night sky concept, and
and this makes sense with
that develops in different directions.
Yeah, it makes sense if the Proto-European people were in the Pontic-Caspian steppe, that to them the realm of waters would be, you know, from where the rain falls. But I mean, aside from those two things, I didn't really have much else.
Exactly. Oh, the one other thing I'll throw in there. So I was talking about Finnicus. He's there in the Salmon of Knowledge. In the equivalent story in the Welsh, it's Taliesin minding the cauldron of Ceridwen. There is also mentioned a one-eyed figure right at that beginning point, a one-eyed old man, but his name is Morda, Morda, but Morda means sea father, and he has one eye. Okay, and he's right there at a what could be an equivalent position to Finnicus, at least chronologically in the story. He doesn't do the same things, but nonetheless, why is this one-eyed figure? One-eyed, usually, as we've said, we see it with the Rudra type more so, but here he's appearing, and he's called Sea Father. So maybe that is yet another thing confirming the overlap of the Rudra one eye with the Varunian sea association. Maybe Morda is the equivalent of Finnicus in the other story, and they're both treating the same overlap in their own way. So I'll just put that out there as a possibility.
Yeah, didn't you also, in your book and your blogs, talk about myth of Rudra castrating himself and retreating into the waters?
True.
Those
So
more transcendent waters.
Yeah, true. So they Rudra and Varuna both have this genital virility loss. So yeah, that's a great point. I hadn't even thought about that, but obviously they're different stories, but they're also aligned pretty well, pretty coincidentally. So you have that. I guess the other thing I wanted to mention on our little chart, I have Ahura Mazda mentioned as it is in the position as the Ironic parallel of Varuna. But I actually, when I loaded it up at the beginning of this stream, I had a strike through on Ahura Mazda because it's just something we've been kind of evolving our thoughts on, and I've been evolving my thoughts about. It seems like something where I don't feel extremely confident that Ahura Mazda is actually the Varuna type, and I think it's an open question. That's all. That's kind of just all I'll say. Just that when you look at Ahura Mazda, as we went into in our previous streams about Prajapati, it seems to me, at least, every narrative mytheme that I can get a hold of in a clear way about Ahura Mazda relates him to the Prajapati type, actually. And this has been not well understood, I think. I think people haven't perhaps understood the Prajapati type super well at large. And so, yeah, I think there's the majority of what you see with Ahura Mazda is Prajapati type. And I haven't been able to find anything that's super convincing that there's a core Varuna aspect to Ahura Mazda. But that doesn't mean there isn't, because there isn't a great other option. It's entirely possible that just like Varuna gains his sovereign power from Prajapati, it's possible that the sovereign aspect of the Ahura Mazda is also Varuna, just like with Odin and Rudra, in a different way. It's possible there's an Ahura Mazda aspect of it's possible there's a Varunian aspect of Ahura Mazda, which is his core sovereignty, so to speak. But even that is, again, it's a little wishy-washy and questionable in my opinion, because one of the strongest links that people usually make, or scholars make, of between Ahura Mazda and Varuna is the name itself, Ahura Mazda. And of course, we discussed how Varuna is one of the main Asuras. He's called Asura in the Vedas, and okay, so that's possible. But Asura also just means Lord. Ahura means something similar, and so it is actually, you can't say that on its own is that doesn't clinch anything. Two different gods in two different pantheons could be called Lord with a semi-generic name for Lord, and they don't have to be connected, of course. Then we do have that Varuna is called something similar, like I think he's called Medha, meaning wise, if I'm not mistaken. So Medha is then related to Mazda, equated to Mazda. So you have the Asura, who is wise. And so that's entirely possible. But again, I think being wise is also a generic trait that could be traded to a different god. If the Prajapati type was the one who they saw as the wise, just as Prajapati himself does embody wisdom when he is the one who invents the rites and invents the mantras, which he then passes down and teaches. He's the teacher of all the gods of the sacred magical rites that overcome death and that sort of thing. So clearly the Prajapati type embodies wisdom. Prajapati is also identified with Manas, which is the cosmic mind. So Prajapati is mind. And then the issue is, okay, if you look at all the myths of Ahura Mazda and everything that you can identify at least is Prajapati type, then why, and if the Varuna type was just a small remnant of sovereignty in that type, why on earth would his name itself come from that tiny Varunian aspect? That doesn't make sense. So that seems like a contradiction or a conflict, where it would be much more likely, if the mythos of Ahura Mazda itself is Prajapati type, it would therefore be much more likely that his name is also coming from Prajapati, from a Prajapati origin as well, and therefore it's just them calling their Prajapati type Ahura Mazda, calling him the wise lord. These are generic traits. So anyways, those are just things to think about. I think we looked at all of his epithets, and the majority of Ahura Mazda's epithets align with Prajapati, and also the craftsman role, like he's called like the great craftsman and stuff like that. That is like Tvashtar, which is an aspect of Prajapati. So it's like time and again, it's Prajapati stuff. But then there are a couple of roles like defender of Asha, which is like order and stuff like that with Prajapati, and bringer of justice. Okay, those are a couple of epithets of Ahura Mazda among many others, which could potentially be Varuna, right? Like we discussed, this terrible sovereign who embodies the Rita, the cosmic law, and enforces it. He's an enforcer, and he brings justice in that way. So it's possible that those little epithets, justice, cosmic law, and sovereignty, that those being part of Ahura Mazda, those could be the remnant of this Varuna aspect. But I still think it's possible that he's just a Prajapati type who just kind of like absorbed those traits because he was being portrayed as the totality highest god. So of course he's going to embody cosmic order. You know what I mean? So yeah, I'd like to hear people's thoughts on this, and maybe debate it, or not debate it, but converse about it with different people over time, and see what you guys think. Josephus, do you have any thoughts on Ahura Mazda? It seems like it's fascinating to me that Mary Boyce, one of the biggest Uranic scholars, she doesn't think Ahura Mazda is Varuna. She thinks Apam Napat absorbed Varuna. So that on its own tells me that she doesn't see anything definitively Varunian in Ahura Mazda. So that, even whether or not she's read about Apam Napat, it's important to note that it's sort of like questionable whether there's a Varuna aspect there, just like it's questionable with Odin. And again, it's entirely possible that both of them have this sort of Varuna aspect as just like a remnant within them. But what do you think? Do you have any thoughts, Josephus, on that?
Yeah, my thoughts is that Ahura Mazda doesn't really fit Varuna, because it's not really a balanced relationship that we see between Ahura Mazda and Mitra.
Exactly.
So in other traditions, right, they're more or less on the same side. Maybe one is the sovereign of the day and the other is sovereign of the night, or in different parts of the epic cycle, maybe in different generations, but they're still both equally sovereign. In the Zoroastrian conception, Ahura Mazda is clearly so much above even Mitra, and Mitra is clearly one of the highest ranking, maybe the second highest ranking deity in Zoroastrianism, but still there's no balance between these two figures. And so it's hard to explain this as a later development. Maybe the original Varuna was simply demonized in the way that the original Indra and Nasatya which becomes Nanhatya in the Old Persian Avestan language. So just as they have been demonized, maybe even the original Varuna was simply dumped. It's a possibility, and maybe traits of this Varuna lingered on, surviving maybe in Ahura Mazda, maybe in Mitra, maybe
exactly both.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking. Like it could even be in traits in Mithra that just carried forward. So, yeah, exactly what you said is kind of what I've been thinking. It makes a lot of sense. And then the question of even the name Mazda, I think you told me that it may come from like Medha, like a sacrifice. Is that how you?
Yeah, it might be a cognate of Sanskrit Medha, which means sacrifice. So it's all regular sound change wise. It would be obviously interesting to kind of figure out how maybe a personified sacrifice got this name. Prajapati is often identified with the sacrifice itself.
Yes, so Prajapati is the personified sacrifice. So that's why I brought it up. Not only is Prajapati potentially, he is identified with traits of wisdom, very teaching the sacred rites and being the embodiment of the manas, the cosmic, the divine mind. So that can be taken care of. But also, if Mazda comes from sacrifice, the god who is the sacrifice is Prajapati. Also, other gods are identified with it, but very prominently it is Prajapati as the totality who is the sacrifice. And then Ahura Mazda's main role is that he's the creator, and that is Prajapati. He's the creator of the world, and he's the god who, as we went into before, has the sacred marriage with his daughter. That is Prajapati, 100%. That is the Prajapati mythos. It's kind of interesting how this hasn't been noted by many scholars, but yeah, it's like he's the one who has a relationship with his daughter, which is then like sacralized because it's this taboo, but it's like becomes this sacred thing. And then he is also, like I said, in his divine names, he is identified with the craftsman and the creator. These are all Prajapati things. So something to keep in mind. I know this like idea of Ahura Mazda as Varuna is very dominant in some scholarship, but it seems very, it seems like they've leapt to this conclusion a bit too soon. So yeah.
Yeah, definitely. The prominence of Ahura Mazda and Prajapati as the embodied sacrifice also makes me think of Janus, the Roman Janus, or Janus, who is the deity who has to be invoked in every single sacrifice. So maybe there's also something there that might be relevant. And again, this is not paralleled by Varuna. There is no requirement to invoke Varuna in every sacrifice, or I don't recall any explicit identification between Varuna and the sacrifice, although it might be sort of an indirect identification, since some Vedic hymns seem to syncretize basically every deity with every other deity.
And what's interesting, like clearly to me at least, the whole thing about Ahura Mazda is that he is the opposite of Rudra. He is the opposite of Ahriman, and Ahriman is really Rudra, is a demonized Rudra type. And so this opposition is fundamental to who Ahura Mazda is. That puts him in the Prajapati role once again. Prajapati as the polarity with Rudra. And then along with that, it's like Varuna is the god of the dark, as we said. Ahura Mazda is more about the light against the darkness of Ahriman. So why would the sovereign of the dark be fundamental to Ahura Mazda, who's all about light against darkness? It at least doesn't align perfectly. Of course, it's possible. Anything's possible that's being combined in there in some way. And Varuna has connections to light as well. I won't. He is one of the Adityas, so he's connections to solar power. But you get what I'm saying. Varuna, as the sovereign of the dark of the night, has potentially more alignments with the dark side of things, which Ahriman comes to embody. So I do think there's this potential to this idea that he could have been dumped or demonized or combined into Ahriman, or again, like just he wasn't favored and sort of some of his sovereign traits just were taken over by Ahura Mazda instead of like an important component of him making up the mythos of Ahura Mazda. So that's kind of the difference, I would say. Okay.
I mean, also for the overlap between a Prajapati type and a sovereign type, we do have the Orphic Zeus swallowing the Protogonos.
Oh, yeah.
So presumably, I mean, there was some sort of esoteric link and maybe identity, as if the sovereign was basically the rational mind of the world, and so the creator was some level higher up than this rational mind of the world. And so this might also explain if any Varuna trait has made its way into the Ahura Mazda mythos and ritual and everything.
Mm-hmm.
If that were the case, I mean, it still might need more evidence.
Mm-hmm. More evidence.
Yeah.
No, that's a great point, though. I totally agree with that. How those things can flow together along those lines. But yeah, my main conclusion is more evidence is needed. I've been trying to investigate the names and things, but again, it leaves it as just kind of an open question, in my opinion. So I'll just I'm going to leave it kind of off the chart for these reasons. So hopefully that makes sense. And that's all I have for today, and I got to get going. But thank you guys for listening, and thank you, Josephus and Arno, once again for joining me. And we covered a lot, and that was a lot of fun.
Well, thank you for inviting us, and thanks to all the spectators, all the watchers who kind of followed us for 2 hours straight.
Yes.
And have a nice day or night or whatever is going to be the part of the day, and so the relevant sovereign deity for you.
Absolutely. All right, that's perfect. All right, thank you very much.
All right,
Okay.
see you guys. Thanks.
Bye.